ProVelo Super League, this is a new pathway up to the World Tour. For the winner of the under-23 category in the men's, they get a stagiaire stint with the Jacob Alula squad. And for the winner of the women's in the under-23s, they get a 12-month contract for the following year with the Liv Alula development squad. It's a new path to the highest level of world cycling. One cyclist, an Australian rider who's made it to the top, he's even finished on the podium at the Volta a España. Started on mountain bikes, he rode regularly in the National Road Series. He's now one of the stars of the sport. This week, we're catching up with Jack Haig. I'm Matt Keenan and looking forward to the conversation. Jack Haig, welcome to the Road to the World Tour, but you're already there, so we're going to get your backstory.
Thanks for having me, Keenan. I'm happy to have a chat.
I mentioned in the intro that you're one of the few Aussies to have made it to the podium of a Grand Tour. Can you name the other men that have made it to the podium of a Grand Tour amongst the Australians?
I'll give it a crack, but I don't reckon I can get them all, to be honest. So we've got Cadell. We've got Jai.
Yeah.
Henley. Then we've got myself. And now this is where I'm going to start to run out of cycling knowledge, and I haven't really got very far, have I? You need to help me out here, mate.
This year, Ben O'Connor.
Oh, Ben O'Connor, of course.
And how about Richie Port? Richie Port as well.
Okay, there were some pretty obvious ones there that I missed.
Okay, and on the women's side, incidentally, the first Australian actually to make it to the podium in a Grand Tour was Liz Heppel in the Tour de France in 1988. Often overlooked.
Yeah, right. Has Amanda Spratt also made the podium, actually?
And the Giro. She's made it at the Giro as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Good work. So one of the big ones that you've got on your CV from the National Road Series is the Tour of Tasmania. When you look back through that honour roll, it is the who's who. The guys that you've just mentioned, Cadell, Richie Port has won that as well. We've had Cameron Meyer has won that. Luke Roberts, Olympic Games gold medalist. Was that a big moment for you winning the Tour of Tassie?
From memory, now we're going back a few years now, so we test my memory here as well. It was actually Tour of Tasmania that almost cemented the overall lead that I had in the NRS series overall. So not only was it winning the Tour of Tasmania, but it was also basically securing the overall win for the NRS series. So it was super important. I actually had quite a bit of pressure going into the races on myself. One, because like you said, the races got quite a big honor roll. A lot of guys have won it in the past, and generally these guys that have won it in the past have gone on to do quite amazing things. But then also for myself to win it and then clinch the series overall was also really important for me.
How significant did it feel as a stepping stone in your career to win the series, the National Road Series?
Well, I guess it kind of led me then into getting that selection spot at Tour Down Under the next year. So I think through the NRS, I got a spot in the Uni SA team, and then that was sort of my opportunity to then showcase who I am to some of the World Tour teams. Because obviously just racing in Australia, it can be a little bit harder to get that attraction, and then getting that win in Tour of Tasmania and the NRS overall then gave me that opportunity to compete at Tour Down Under and sort of put my name out there to some of the World Tour teams. At
the start of that season, were you realistically dreaming about making up into the World Tour, or when was that dream ignited?
Well, it's a bit of a funny story, to be honest, because I actually hadn't planned to do almost any road cycling that entire year. And then it was through Andrew Christie-Johnson as well as Dean Clark, who was the owner of Talk Nutrition, which was supporting me on the mountain bikes at the time. He started sponsoring at the time, I think it was called Huon Genesis Avanti, run by Andrew Christie-Johnson. And I went to a training camp with them in December, not really expecting to join the team or even to start doing the NRS series. And I had a good training camp. And during the training camp, I think Andrew spoke to me and said, look, we don't have any spot for you on the team anymore. I don't know what you expect from this training camp. I said, look, don't worry. I want to race mountain bikes. So I'm just here to sort of experience a road training camp. And then a few days later, we had a training ride, and Richie tried to drop everyone in the training ride. And I think he dropped everyone except for me. And I think about the day later or the next day after that, Andrew pulled me aside and said, you know what? Maybe you can get a few bikes and you can do a couple of races for us. And I think the first race in that series was over in Perth, and I ended up winning it. So then Andrew said, well, you need to kind of keep doing the series. And at the time, I still wanted to sort of race the mountain bike a little bit more. But then as the series went on, I got a little bit more excited about road cycling. I learned a little bit more along the way, and it kind of, the NRS sort of created my enjoyment and love for road cycling, because before that, I was basically just a mountain biker that did a few road races, and it was in 2014 that completely switched, and I was a road cyclist that hardly did any mountain bike racing.
You've followed in some good footsteps going in that path. Obviously, Cadella's the big obvious one. Just that Tour of Perth, or it was called the Tour de Perth. Can you remember some of the other names who were in the race? I can. Two in particular.
Go on, tell me.
Michael Storer, Jai Hindley.
That would make a lot of sense then.
They were juniors. They're a couple of years younger than you. They were, I think they were top age under 19s at the time.
Yeah, because I must have been my second year under 23, and they must have probably been their first like elite road race that they probably did.
It was.
And obviously we know that those two have gone on to do some pretty amazing things as well.
It shows the depth of Australian cycling. There was a really strong period in Australian cycling then. Can you remember who you were going toe-to-toe with in the Tour of Tassie that you won?
I think it was maybe... I remember there was one day that basically secured my GC, and I was in a small group up the road with Darren Lapthorne and Robbie Hucker. But then also, I know my teammate Nathan Earl was also competing, but I couldn't tell you who was on the podium. My memory's horrible.
That's all right. The only thing that matters is that you're on the top of the podium. So going back to your mountain biking days, going right back to the very beginning, what was the start of your cycling career? How did you get into it?
It was through the Bendigo Cycling Club. So I moved to Bendigo after living in Queensland until I was around sort of 12, 13 years old. And then we moved down to Bendigo, and my parents were looking for some activities for me and my sister to do and try and integrate into the community a little bit, seeing as we were quite new there. And I'd always sort of ridden bikes, whether that was just to go to and from school, to and from friends' houses. And when we moved to Bendigo, I sort of started riding bikes even more because it was a bit more easier to get around Bendigo than where we were living in Queensland. And I think they saw that I was riding a lot. One of the things that was there was they had a mountain bike club, and we went to do a mountain bike race. And I think it was maybe after the Youth Commonwealth Games were held in Bendigo, and we went to go and watch the mountain bike racing. And it was maybe soon after that. I can't remember if it was before or after the Youth Commonwealth Games that I did the first race with the Bendigo Mountain Bike Club. And then that sort of kickstarted cycling a little bit for me. And then a few other key influences was probably the track cycling that Bendigo had. They had a program for young riders to learn how to basically ride a track bike and do a little bit of racing on I think it was a Thursday night. And then also Tim Decker, who's now the head track coach for the Australian team. He also had a bit of a, I guess, like cycling club or coaching service that was run out of Bendigo as well. And he sort of helped me along the way. But yeah, I was never super into cycling when I was younger, but definitely the community in Bendigo sort of just kept me in the sport. And then slowly, as I got a little bit older, I started to get quite a lot more into mountain biking. And then a few people helped me in the mountain bike scene. And then, like I was explaining before, I then transitioned across into the road cycling.
For a population of its size, Bendigo probably has the best return on investment for getting cyclists up into the World Tour. You spent a lot of time with Chris Hamilton, Zach Dempster. There's plenty that have gone through Bendigo of your generation that have made it, or been really close to making it.
So ironically enough, 2 days ago, I was at Chris Hamilton's wedding, and my wife is Spanish. And when she was starting to meet a lot of Chris's friends and a lot of people at the wedding, she looked across me and said, "But what's up with Bendigo? Why is there so many cyclists and why are there so many people here from Bendigo? I said, to be honest, I don't really know. I think it's just, that community that they built there around cycling. There's such a big, strong group of cyclists and people that try and organize things. They're really encouraging of the younger children to get into cycling. There's a good sort of stepping stone there through either the mountain bike club or through the track cycling club to then move into road cycling. And we've definitely produced well above our population size for successful cyclists.
You mentioned Tim Decker and having him as a coach. At what age did you start getting coached? And at what age would you recommend a kid or a teenager starts getting coached now?
So Tim was never really my coach, but he just had this group that had a training ride. He did coach a lot of athletes in Bendigo. And then I would just go, I think it was maybe a Wednesday after school, and we'd go with him and he'd organize a little group ride with some junior cyclists. And then I guess I got kind of serious about cycling and getting a coach when I was my last year of juniors. So I got selected for the junior long team for World Championships at the start of the year. And I think at the time it was called AusMTB, or the National Mountain Bike group selected around 10 or 12 athletes to be part of this long team. And I was selected as the last athlete. And during the Easter school holidays, we went across to New Zealand and we did basically like a week and a half training camp. Essentially, we went to Rotorua. We rode mountain bikes around Rotorua, which is one of the nicest places to ride mountain bikes in the Southern Hemisphere. And then we did a race. And I remember I came back from that experience, and one, I got a lot fitter because I rode my bike every single day. And I remember riding to school after the school holidays. I was like, oh, that's a bit easier actually. And I also had a really nice time. And I sort of then set a bit of a goal of trying to then make it to World Championships. And I reached out to Matt Wallace. Wow, I'm blanking there on the name. So he also represented Australia on the mountain bikes, and he had a small coaching group in Bendigo. And then he coached me through that, I guess, first year until I then got selected to do Junior Mountain Bike Worlds over in Europe. And then as I moved into the Talk mountain bike team, Mark Fenner, who was also maybe a bit of a well-known name in Australia for helping some cyclists during sort of that period between 2010 and 2018. He had a big coaching service, and then he really took me under his wing and sort of helped educate me mostly about training and nutrition and coaching and how to get the best out of myself. So I was maybe a little bit later to the sport than some other guys, because there were a lot of guys younger than me in Bendigo that were being coached by Tim. But I think in the long run, it maybe helped me because I got to experience a lot of different stuff as a kid. I still played a lot of soccer and cricket and all these other sports, and I didn't really specialize too early. And it wasn't until I guess came to the conclusion myself that I had this goal of really wanting to go to Junior World Championships that I sort of really went down the path of trying to be quite serious about it all and trying to have a coach.
And it feels like this generation now, which is not too removed from you, when I say this generation of those who are even under 17 or first year under 19s, they've got a lot more structure in their training programs than what you ever had. I think that's part of the Pogacar and the Evenepoel effect, is people are thinking, okay, if I don't have a contract by the time I'm 20, I'm out of business. But, you know, it's not necessarily the case. It certainly wasn't the case with you.
No, absolutely. And I think now we've gone through a very condensed period where teams are really looking for the really young talent. And I'm not sure whether that's going to last for a very long time. Like if you look back now, maybe 5-6 years ago, everyone was trying to sign the next South American talent. And yes, we have a lot of them, but I think now it's transitioned into now trying to find just the next best young talent. And I'm not sure that's going to last forever, because you can still be a great cyclist and you can still turn professional at the end of your under 23 years. And when I look at some of the cyclists now that turn professional almost directly out of juniors, I think I might have struggled to do that, especially when you're not from Europe and you have to move here. You need to create a new life. You're a long way away from family. It's maybe a little bit different if you're European, but I think everything that I learned through those 4 years that I did of under 23s really helped set me up to have a successful professional career. And I'm not sure it would have been the same if I had turned professional earlier.
Yeah, there is a real trap of falling into, oh, well, this is the way that it's been successful over here. That's the way we have to do it. And a guy like Simon Gerrans didn't make it into the pro peloton until he was 24, 25. So in the current system with the under 23s, he could have been well and truly looked over, yet he's been one of Australia's most successful riders. Going back to that win of the National Road Series, and then was it the end of that year that you rode the Tour d'Avenir and you finished about 14th or something or other, and the following year you finished second? How big was that to do the Tour d'Avenir?
So it was the year after that. So no, you're right, actually. In 2014, I went to the Tour de l'Avenir and we were there with Robert Power, and he was second. And then I was somewhere, just inside that, either top 15, top 20. And then in my last year, under 23, in 2015, I again went back to Tour de l'Avenir and I was second behind Marc Soler, who ironically just lives down the road from me now. But
what's your relationship like with Marc Soler now?
Nah, it's pretty good now. He also has a kid a very similar age to myself, and we get along pretty well. But at the time, it was also an interesting period because it was when, I'm not sure if it's still allowed now, when if you were under 23 and professional, you were allowed to do Tour de l'Avenir and I think also under 23 World Championships. And I remember before we started Tour de l'Avenir, we had, I think it was Sebastian Henao, who had done like the Giro d'Italia twice. And I think Marc Soler had also done the Giro d'Italia earlier in that year. And we were kind of all a bit intimidated by these guys that were already professional and had done quite a few World Tour races that were coming to l'Avenir. But we showed that we were able to compete more or less at that same level as well. But yeah, no, my relationship with Marc now is quite good. And obviously that result in Tour de l'Avenir is something that I look back on because very similarly to Tour de Tasmania, if you look at the honor roll of who's been on the podium at those races, they've normally gone on to achieve really, really good things.
Did you have a contract sewn up with GreenEDGE before getting second in the Tour d'Avenir, or was that the moment that clinched it?
So the way that I got my contract was after the NRS overall win, and it was getting the spot in the Uni SA team at Tour Down Under, where I won the best young riders jersey, and I was somewhere, I think, in the top 15 on GC. And then the week afterwards, Herald Sun Tour started, and I went there and I was third on GC and also won the best young riders jersey there. And I think it was those two races and maybe also Herald Sun Tour because I was competing against Simon Clark, who was riding for GreenEDGE at the time, that I had a few World Tour teams reach out to me, and GreenEDGE was one of them. And then GreenEDGE gave me the opportunity because I still hadn't really done any racing in Europe yet on the road for me to have an extra year of under 23 and then sign when I finished those years so I could get that experience, which I think was also really useful. Like talking about guys turning professional too early, I think GreenEDGE also saw back then that letting me learn road cycling at that under 23 level before I got put into the World Tour straight away was probably the best for my development.
So do you think that making that transition as well over to Europe with an Australian team was much smoother, a much easier process than, say, going to a Spanish team or an Italian team or a Dutch team?
100%. I think also now, I think I'm about to start my 10th year professional. And 10 years ago, it wasn't maybe so international. Whereas now I think if you do join one of these French teams or Spanish teams, they're a little bit more open to these riders that don't speak Spanish or don't speak French, and they understand a little bit how hard it is for people that aren't European to move to Europe and change their life. But 10 years ago, I think it would have been quite hard for me to make that transition. And I'm super grateful that I was able to do it with GreenEDGE because I spent 5 years there, which I really enjoyed. That was super easy for me. Everyone spoke English and everyone also understood the struggles of moving to Europe.
If you were advising a 19 or 20-year-old Jack Haig now, who's going into riding the ProVelo Super League, but dreaming of making it into the Pro Peloton in Europe, how would you advise them to structure this season, given that this series finishes at the end of March?
Well, I think also now you have a bit of more of a unique opportunity where I think in general, the world's getting a little bit smaller now with the technology like we're doing now and the access to everything, that if the series can finish in March, you also have the opportunity to try and get a little bit of experience racing in Europe when the European summer is there. If you can find development team or a smaller French team. Like someone that I think that did this quite well is Nick Schultz. And Nick Schultz wasn't part of the AIS under 23 team at the time, and he actually went to France and he rode for a French club team similar to Jai Henley. I think he also did a similar thing in Italy, and it's possible to get this experience and balance it with doing a series like the ProVelo series, and then also doing some experience in Europe racing for one of these smaller teams. And it can also help you understand whether cycling and being an athlete in Europe is what you want, because there are a lot of sacrifices and it is very hard. And I think until you experience it in Europe, it's hard to know exactly what you're dreaming of.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the biggest elements, one of the biggest challenges, is that living away from home element, change of language, change of culture. Whereas if you're a native from Europe, you can still be at home with your parents, so they're taking care of the rent, the food, and the washing, and you can still be studying part-time and have uni contact hours and chasing your dream. Whereas as an Aussie, you've got to give up a lot to go over and chase it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also you need to grow up very fast as well. Like you said, if you're European, you can live at home until you're 25, because basically as a professional athlete, we hardly spend that much time at home, and you just basically come home, do your laundry, do a couple of training rides, and normally you're off to the next race or to the next training camp. And I think for the Europeans, it's much easier. But then, like you said, when you're coming across here at age 22, 23, or even younger, you need to find an apartment for yourself in a country where you normally don't speak the language. You need to organize SIM cards. You need to figure out how to get to and from the airport, whether you need a car, and just all these other things that just take a lot of admin time during the day, and especially extra time because you're doing it in a country that you don't know how it works. Whereas like if you need to move out of home in Australia, you know how to contact Telstra, or you know how to look for an apartment and call up a real estate agent. Whereas when you're trying to do that in Europe, you don't even know the website to look at for an apartment, or you don't know if you call a real estate agent whether they're going to speak English, or yeah, it's just all a little bit more daunting, a little bit harder.
How good a role model do you think Nick Schultz is as somebody that as a junior, he wasn't touted as being a future superstar? He's been close to winning a stage of the Tour de France. And you mentioned that path that he went through, and also in Spain with the small Spanish team, Cajaral, he completely immersed himself in the culture of wherever it was that he was living.
I think Nick is he's actually an amazing athlete, and also the path that he went through. We crossed paths a few times in under 23s, and I always had a lot of admiration for him because it's definitely a much harder path that he went through than I went through. But for him to get to where he is today, he now speaks perfect French. He now speaks perfect Spanish. He now has had all these life lessons, managed to experience all these different cultures, riding for these different teams in different countries. And like you said, now he's gone on to race for GreenEDGE, and now he's having an amazing time in the Israel team. And this year he won a stage in Vuelta a Catalunya and has, like I said, almost won a stage in the Tour de France. I think he shows that there is a way to turn professional without having to go through what was the Australian system before, where majority of us came through, and that if you really believe in yourself and it's something that you really want, you're able to achieve it.
Yeah, he's an absolute picture of perseverance. And Simon Clarke, although he went through the Australian Institute of Sport system under 23 program that was available then, he was never a guy as a junior that was touted as being an absolute world-class cyclist. There was plenty of doubt about Simon Clarke. They're both awesome role models. We've had a chat to Loretta Hanson as well. She's another one that wasn't the easiest path. She went and did the crits in the US. For you and your experience of going from winning the Tour of Tasmania to then riding your first Grand Tour, how big is that gap between riding a domestic race in Australia and one of the biggest races on the planet?
I think my entire first year as a World Tour athlete was just a bit of a whirlwind. And to be honest, I don't really look back on it with the greatest memories, because I went through all those struggles that I spoke about before, about trying to set up a place in Europe, trying to learn how to navigate going to different countries to go to all these races. And then also the races at the time, I was struggling so much doing all the World Tour races that year, and then going on to do La Vuelta a España at the end of the year. I remember I just suffered through La Vuelta, and it was, I had a massive sense of achievement at the finish, but I was so tired, and like I really actually questioned whether I was good enough to be in the World Tour. And especially when you come from having won races like Tour de Tasmania or having finished second in Tour de l'Avenir, you kind of expect from yourself that you'd be able to step in and be relatively competitive at a World Tour level. But instead, I kind of just got my head kicked in and didn't really feel like I was even deserving of a spot in the World Tour. And then obviously slowly it evolved as I learned a little bit more and as I figured out how to better manage my life around cycling and how to better race and fit in the World Tour peloton. But definitely that transition period is very hard. I think now the teams are doing better at making that transition a bit easier, because there was definitely a bit more of a culture there that when you turned professional back then, you really had to go through some of those hard lessons to arrive to the top. Whereas I think now the teams are realizing that if you really nurture an athlete and look after them, they can actually come in and do quite well at the very beginning.
Have you read the book Atomic Habits, or you're aware of the book Atomic Habits?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that you've read that book. What are those habits that you've been able to apply? It's the small things that you do regularly, time and time again. It's one of the most boring elements of training is that consistency. What are some of the habits that you have, whether it's on the bike or off the bike, that have enabled you to go from getting your head kicked in and not thinking you're good enough at the Vuelta to finishing on the podium in third place?
I think it's just, like you said, the most important thing is consistency, dedication to the sport, but also dedication to trying to learn about yourself and learn about the sport and learn what works for you, because what works for other people might not necessarily work for you. But it's always worth trying and taking on some advice from other people, but always try and optimize it for how it best suits you, because the sport's so hard as it is that if you're trying to do things that you don't enjoy, it's really not going to work. And you just need to try to make the hard things that are being a professional athlete as enjoyable as possible, so they don't feel like a grind every day. And yeah, it is super hard, but as long as you can have those small moments during the day that are enjoyable and keep you coming back, then that's the most important thing, because you have to come back day after day to then get those small incremental improvements over the weeks, months, and years to then arrive at a higher level.
One of the keys to getting those small improvements is consistency with things like sleep and diet and so many of those patterns that you have that are off the bike. But when you're traveling to races, whether that's at World Tour level or whether that's going to an event in New South Wales or South Australia, you lose a bit of that control. Do you have any strategies or advice that you can give people to deal with not being in your normal structure when it's coming to the day or two before race day?
I think it's super important not to have too many sort of superstitions or things that you think you have to have a good night's sleep, or you have to have a good race. Because like you said, you're traveling and then maybe you need to have avocado toast and breakfast because that's what you think makes you a good cyclist, but maybe they don't have avocados. So I think it's, again, educating yourself that many things can work for you, and then having sort of that memory bank of, okay, so if they don't have avocado toast, then I know that oats and bananas work, or that if you don't sleep very well in a certain room because it's too light, bring an eye mask and use the eye mask instead. And just sort of always figure out these little workarounds so that you can make these strange environments that you can sometimes end up in as comfortable as possible, so that they work as good for you as possible. Because at the end of the day, you need to make sure that, like you said, you have good sleep, you have good nutrition, and also that you feel comfortable, because if you're uncomfortable and not enjoying the environment you're in, it's going to be very hard to get the most out of yourself.
And a good relationship with your coach is going to be really important too.
And your roommate, if you're rooming.
There's not too many bike races that people go to, particularly at domestic level in Australia, where you're not rooming with someone.
Exactly. And even at a World Tour level, you're still rooming with someone. So be respectful of the other person, because that'll also help a lot.
So whoever wins this series, they get a stagiaire stint with GreenEDGE at the end of the year. But it's a big gap from the end of this series in March through to August, September, where the stagiaire gets underway. What's your advice to the person that wins this series and gets that opportunity for that big window that's open between the end of this and the start of the next step?
I think an important thing to do, and maybe something that I'm very bad at, and I think a lot of athletes are bad at, is take a tiny bit of time to enjoy the fact that you've won this massive event and that you get to have this big opportunity in quite a few months' time. So don't think that as soon as the series finishes that you need to then even work harder or even dedicate more or sacrifice more to try and be better for this stage year, because it's quite a long time away. Take a small period of time, enjoy the fact that you won this event, and then you get this crazy opportunity at the end of the year. And take a little bit of time just to rest, because it's obviously quite stressful having to compete in all these races and then also travel a lot, and then slowly build back into racing and just try maybe reach out to some of the guys in the Jayco team or some other guys like myself or Jai. And you can also ask for a little bit of advice on where you're going to move to Europe, because I imagine you're going to need to figure out a place to live, and just try to plan a little bit to make it as smooth and as easy as possible, and to have a bit of this mental image in your head of what you'd like it to be.
And what about for the there's going to be more of these riders than they're in this category, where this is not their Willy Wonka golden ticket. This isn't their road to the World Tour immediately. They finish 5th or 10th or 15th. What's your advice to them?
To make sure that they don't get disheartened from it, because like we've spoken about with Nick Schultz and Simon Clark, that you don't need to be the best at this to have a successful career in the World Tour. So keep working away at it. And if you believe in yourself enough, you'll always find a way to arrive to the World Tour, whether that's reaching out to a French club team or reaching out to a small Italian team and asking, hey, look, guys, these are the results I had in Australia. I'm super motivated to try and race in Europe and sort of showcase myself, and I'd really appreciate the opportunity. There's always a way to do it if you dedicate enough of your time and if you believe in yourself.
2 final questions, one looking back, one looking forward. The first one looking back. What's your fondest memory of racing on the road in Australia at a domestic level? Not Tour Down Under or Herald Sun Tour.
Well, I think that it's maybe goes back to that Tour de Perth, where it was the first sort of NRS race that I did and that I won. And I think that sort of helped ignite a little bit of a fire in me that maybe I am quite good at cycling and maybe I can create a life around it. So that's probably one of my fondest memories of domestic racing. And then also I got a 3rd place at the national championships for road cycling and in the under 23s. And that was also a pretty proud moment.
Can you remember who won that year?
I think No. He never went on he rode for Drapac for a little bit, and now I'm blanking on his name because he never went on to the World Tour, I don't think.
Okay. Yeah.
I think
Jordan Kirby?
Yeah, it could have been Jordan Kirby. Yeah, I think it was Jordan Kirby.
Yeah. He won a world title on the track in the individual pursuit. He's now coaching.
Yeah.
And he's done a good job coaching. I think he's actually the bike coach for Ashley Gentle, who's one of our best triathletes. So he's managed to work out a career for himself. You mentioned the fire in the belly. So this is the question looking forward. What's the fire in the belly that keeps Jack Haig going?
So I've been part of a team that have won a Grand Tour before with Simon Yates in Vuelta a España. And then I was also part of the Giro d'Italia, where he had the pink jersey for 2 weeks. And I would really like to be part of a team that wins a Tour de France and to play a key role in that, because the journey that you go on during a Grand Tour, and especially a Grand Tour like Tour de France, is a special one. And then I think to have the memories of being part of a team that has won the Tour de France when I retire will be pretty special.
I look forward to watching that next phase of your career, and hopefully that dream does come true. Thanks for sharing your insights and giving advice to the next generation that's coming through.
No worries.